Thank you very much for people who might be joining us this morning for this very special National Reconciliation Week breakfast. We're just going to take a few moments while a few more people are starting to come in with us this morning. We hope you've got a coffee in hand or a cup of tea. Lovely to have your company, and we'll soon do our acknowledgement to country this morning.
Hi, my name's Vicki Clark and I'm a proud Mutti Wimba Wamba woman. My dreaming is Lake Mungo. Lake Mungo is where my spirit lays in the land. It is where my spirit is where I am today. My spirit is alive at Lake Mungo. And I know when it's time to leave this land, my spirit will return back to Lake Mungo. We call it our dreaming. It is the past, the present, and the future. I want to welcome you all to Aboriginal Australia, and I'm currently sitting on the tribal lands of the Wati Wati people. And it's a privilege to share the gift of mindfulness from my own personal experience by witnessing some of the most sacred ceremonies across many Aboriginal communities. And I want to share with you some of those ceremonies and rituals and teachings from my old people that weaves my spirit.
Hello, Uncle Charles Pakana.
Technology works after all. So, Nicole, are you okay if I take over now? Is that fine?
Absolutely.
Lovely. Thank you so much indeed. Well, my name is Uncle Charles Pakana. I'm an Aboriginal man of Tasmanian descent, but I have strong personal community and country connections across Victoria, an area in which I'm privileged to work as a journalist. I'm here right now on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and the artwork you see behind me is on a wall from the Barbunnenbeek Aboriginal Gathering Place in Heidelberg West, where I'm privileged to be a member and the current chairman. I will just go through some housekeeping events. Now, we're going to be having Rueben Berg having a yarn in a short while. If you do have questions for Rueben, then you can pop them in the Q&A section, and if we have time, they will be fed through. And look, having interviewed Rueben a number of times, I know he'll get through as many as possible in a short time. So we're going to be able to get some stuff done there. In case of emergency, then there's nothing at all we can do because you're in your own home, I would assume. Breakfast will be served in around about 10 minutes. So please just make sure that you don't make noise as the waiters come around to your houses and drop off the McDonald's breakfast. Please ensure your phones are on silent. Not that that really matters here. Now, there's also going to be a survey on this event. So we do encourage you to fill out the survey, really important. And there will be a random drawing where Rueben and I will win for 2 $100 Mabu vouchers. Of course, it's going to be really embarrassing if Rueben and I actually do win. Hopefully they'll have enough sense not to do that. We're going to start off today with an introduction by Aunty Vicki Clark. And I'm sure those of you who know Aunty Vicki will be really chuffed about this. She has been at the forefront of national reconciliation for I think longer than you and I have been around. It's been an amazing stuff. She is an OAM. She is a Moti Moti and Wamba Wamba woman. And she has been a valued member of the Reconciliation Victoria First Peoples Cultural Council since 2018. And the Cultural Council is a very important part of the Reconciliation Victoria work, providing that guidance, that important guidance to the operations of Reconciliation Victoria. I'm not going to ask you to join me in an applause, but if we could now welcome the amazing Aunty Vicki Clark. Aunty, over to you.
Thanks, Unc. Just wanted to say I feel like I've risen from the resurrection. I've been in bed for the last 2 days, crook as anything with some sort of lurgy, thanks to my granddaughter who brought that home. And but yeah, I'm here. I too want to just acknowledge I'm on the Waddy land, Waddy Waddy people's land, up here on the beautiful border of New South Wales and Victoria. And I've been asked to do a short introduction this morning, just on my experience of my involvement with reconciliation, and some of the things that I think what's the theme now more than ever is how important that is, and just to bring into the reality of where reconciliation from Reconciliation Victoria, where they actually are today. And I couldn't help but reflect on the many years of my involvement, which just said I've been there forever. Well, I feel like I have been there forever, and it's just like a deja vu again. Every I don't know, every year, every third year, we seem to be in there fighting for the governments to justify. Like a lot of the funding comes from the state government. We're not a recognised body that's linked with, the First Peoples State Relation team or org that we have, their department. We're not a related organisation. We're not listed as a related organisation, yet we do get funding from DPC and various departments. But it's just it's a never-ending battle for Reconciliation Victoria. The growth of the RAPs that we have within the state, nearly 600 reconciliation action plans in the state of Victoria, all want a piece of Reconciliation Victoria. Yes, it's time now we need to move into a fee-for-service model, and we've got something like 28 local governments, which is so powerful, especially in the country areas. The local reconciliation groups, they do make a difference. I really wish we had one up here on Wamba country with the Swan Hill Local Council. It'd be such make a difference in this redneck town that we're in, and the referendum showed us that, how redneck they are. But it's important. Our allies are more important. And look, there's fatigue. We've all got fatigue from building our hopes up, our energies, the high, and then the big drop, the letdown, and there is fatigue. But 22 years RecFic's been going, and people will probably say, oh well, well surely how long do we have to? Like Paul Keating called a 10-year span of term of reconciliation. 10 years, he said, oh, we can cut this reconciliation in 10 years. That was a joke. But anyway, he started the whole thing in Redfern Park there, made it very clear that we needed a process of reconciliation. But then, the process of reconciliation, it isn't a start and an end. It's an ongoing journey. And fellas, people have to remember that. In our state, we're in the most, now more than ever, we're going to need Reconciliation Victoria to mediate some of this stuff, especially with our TO groups. It's great we've got Rueben here today from the Treaty Assembly. It's fantastic. But on the ground, we're going to need someone like Reconciliation Victoria to stop a lot of that backlash that's going to happen. And it's our kids. It's when as these treaty negotiations start to, as they start, the negotiation, the recognitions and all that,
It's our kids in our schoolyards that are going to be copping this terrible racism. And it's coming from mum and dad, especially in the country areas. Was that fear campaign's going to happen, you know? You know, I sat on a bus with a fella. I was on the way to Melbourne. He got off at Crang or somewhere, anyway. And he said, that referendum, if that referendum gets up, those abos are going, I'm sitting next to this fella. He said, those abos are going to get everything. I said, excuse me, do you know I'm Aboriginal? He said, I thought you was. And I thought, see how they think a referendum was going to give us everything? Give us what? I said, you know, what do you mean give us everything? I can't take your backyard, mate. I can't take your neighbour's backyard. It's not about that. It's about recognition and rights and justice for our future generations. It's about carving a path into the future of prosperity that we've lived with for 60,000 years in this country. So reconciliation for me is about quietly chipping away into those areas so that our children don't have to suffer in our playgrounds or on our football ovals, because that's where it happens, and it comes from home. Mum and dad creating that fear. So, you know, now more than ever, we need reconciliation, Victoria. We really, really do. You know, I know racism is tabooed in schools, but it happens. It happens. I know we have child safety standard policy, number 1, standards. We have it, but it happens. You know, and so once it happens, it's hard to remove from the spirit of the person. It's really, really hard. So that's all I wanted to say, Unc, about reconciliation and the theme. Now more than ever, we need as many allies we can possibly get. It's great that we've got a growth of allies. And, of course, the Europe Commission. You know, gee, wait until that explodes. You know, we're starting to get little reports coming out, but wait till the final, you know, the outcome. The other day, the police, you know, the Victorian Vicpol, you know, Victorian police apologised for their role they played in the removal of Aboriginal children. You know, very moving, very powerful. I watched it. It was incredible. Incredible moment again in history. Now, that don't happen just like that. That happens because there's people chipping away behind, groups of people, allies, making a difference. The silent achievers, really. Okay. All right, thank you. That's all I need to say. And I'm going to go back to bed soon.
Aunty Vicki, thank you so much indeed. Really powerful words, and I think poignant words and definitely time-appropriate words. By way of anecdote, I was at Merrybeck yesterday, emceeing a festival there, and it was all about just a small part of land on Wurundjeri Wurrung country, and we reflected on the number of years it has taken the allies and the First Peoples in that area, with one of the great leaders, Uncle Gary Murray, along with local reconciliation advocates who were really just working like crazy. And it's tragic that they have to work so hard just to remediate and work on such a small piece of land. I do want to extend my acknowledgement that I made earlier to all allies out there today. There's no doubt at all that I believe, speaking on behalf of Rueben, Aunty Vicki, that without allies, then reconciliation would be nowhere near where it is today. And respect to all of you, because your work is just absolutely critical. We're now going to hear from a great friend of mine. We worked together extensively last year in the lead up to the referendum, Professor Andrew Gunstone. He's the inaugural Associate Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Reconciliation at Federation University and has institutional responsibility in that organisation for reconciliation and the RAP. He is widely recognised as an international expert in academic and industry engagements right across the area of reconciliation. Stunningly, he has written over 130 publications and will no doubt make mention of his new book today. Andrew, can I get a nod on that? Yes, we're going to hear from that. And he regularly provides advice to industry, community and governments. So, Andrew, over to you. Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you very much, Uncle Charles. I acknowledge the Djabwurrung peoples as traditional owners of the lands on which I'm speaking this morning and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm here in Western Victoria today to deliver a public lecture on reconciliation this evening. I also acknowledge the continuing and unceded sovereignties of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations and the wonderful work of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria in leading this state to treaty. Reconciliation Victoria, the National Centre for Reconciliation, Truth and Justice, and Federation University Australia remain steadfast in our unwavering support of the Uluru Statement from the Heart with its calls for voice, treaty and truth. It is an honour today to present with Rueben, Aunty Vicki and Uncle Charles. Thank you all for your wonderful leadership over many, many years. As Uncle Charles said, I've just had my latest book published, Reflections on the Voice, during and after the campaign. This is the first book written after the referendum that explores 10 key signposts from the referendum for our ongoing national journey of reconciliation. These signposts include ensuring reconciliation is substantive, not performative, addressing the appalling levels of racism, recognising the critical importance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights, addressing the shallow understandings in this nation of equality, the critical importance of education and truth-telling, strengthening multicultural community engagements, and a call out to one of the National Centre's really transformational projects in this space, engaging with multicultural communities led by Maria Demopoulos and Shankar Kassinathan, that's doing some extraordinary work in engaging multicultural communities. Another signpost is engaging much more with suburban and regional and remote Australia. To also engage with international agreements such as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Ensuring allies continue on the reconciliation journey, and critically to recommit our support for voice, treaty and truth. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all these 10 lessons in just a few minutes today, but instead I wanted to focus on one specific signpost that Uncle Charles asked me to look at today, and looking at the signpost of ensuring reconciliation is substantial rather than performative. So when reconciliation was first developed as a national policy area by the Hawke government in 1991, there was a concerted attempt to make the word as inclusive as possible through slogans such as reconciliation means many different things to many different people. And while this approach broadened the reach of reconciliation, it did, though, confuse many people about its actual meaning. And this confusion continues today, as demonstrated by my 20-year longitudinal research on reconciliation attitudes, which is the longest such study in Australia. And further, through this confusion, many people view reconciliation as only about improving relationships. And while this is undoubtedly a key element, there are also many other critical components of a meaningful and a substantial reconciliation movement. These areas, which I and many, many others have advocated for decades, include recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights, such as self-determination, free, prior and informed consent, and Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. Implementing UNDRIP, which, as I mentioned before, is the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Enacting national, state and regional treaties. And again, I acknowledge the leadership of the First Peoples Assembly in Victoria on this. Acknowledging history, education and truth-telling. Achieving both reparative justice as well as distributive justice. Addressing institutional and individual racism and whiteness. Challenging racism, white privilege and white fragility. Privileging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges. Dismantling existing power relationships, implementing structural reform, and prioritising and ensuring cultural responsiveness. The referendum campaign, though, clearly illustrated that many non-Indigenous peoples and organisations who claim to support reconciliation, in fact, do not actually support substantive reconciliation, which addresses the above points I just discussed. And this was clearly illustrated with many organisations that have reconciliation action plans or RAPs. RAPs are agreements between Reconciliation Australia and an organisation that articulates that company's commitments to reconciliation. By having a RAP, an organisation should recognise the importance of First Nations voices to the organisation and commit to increasing First Nations staff, executives, board members, suppliers and partners. However, many RAP organisations, including universities and local governments, who often engage in social commentary, demonstrably failed to genuinely support a First Nations voice to Parliament. These organisations justified this inconsistent position by arguing they had to be neutral and not be political. This approach, though, failed to recognise their RAP commitments and ignored Professor Megan Davis's argument that deciding to not take a stance on the voice is still actually taking a political decision, as silence is political. Many non-Indigenous people also contradicted their supposed commitment to reconciliation by failing to support the voice. They often then reacted with white fragility when challenged over this hypocrisy. These organisations and individuals often feel more comfortable with performative reconciliation, such as organising morning teas for Reconciliation Week or wearing trendy t-shirts. I do want to stress that I'm not opposed to many of these initiatives. Morning teas, for example, can be really useful in helping to engage the broader work environment in the importance of reconciliation. However, these actions by themselves are just not enough. They have to be accompanied by other strategies that genuinely engage with substantive reconciliation, such as organisations developing explicit anti-racism policies regarding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander matters, and having genuine truth-telling, truth-listening, and what I call truth-enacting processes within their organisation. Some performative reconciliation issues, though, are just completely inappropriate. For example, a previous university I worked at tried to commission a non-Indigenous artist to paint a First Nations themed mural on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Centre and did not consult with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff. I stopped this shocking initiative, but was told by a senior executive that the idea was not about the RAP or self-determination, but about the university's image. This is just a clear example of performative reconciliation. In another example from a different university, a senior executive posted what they thought was a supportive comment on social media the day after the referendum. I advised the First Nations leaders had asked us as non-Indigenous allies to not comment publicly on the referendum during this week of silence and asked if the post could be taken down for that week. However, the person refused to remove the post, despite me pointing out the hypocrisy of posting that they would continue to listen to First Nations people while ignoring the request from First Nations leaders to not comment publicly that week. Their desire to be seen to be being supportive was another clear example of performative reconciliation. Understandably, some commentators have argued that the appalling referendum result means that reconciliation is dead. My view, though, is that the result clearly reiterates performative reconciliation is dead. The broad reconciliation movement, including RAP organisations and local reconciliation groups, need to focus on substantive reconciliation much more strongly. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights, self-determination, truth-telling, reparative justice, and the other elements I mentioned earlier, and reject shallow and often meaningless initiatives of performative reconciliation. If this is not done, the broad reconciliation movement will not be able to make any meaningful contribution to addressing the continuing and substantial legacies of the invasion, dispossession, colonisation and racism. Thank you.
Thanks so much, well, Rueben. Thanks so much indeed, Andrew. Really appreciate it. And look, I do encourage people to explore a bit more that difference between substantive reconciliation and performative reconciliation. I remember the first time that Andrew made mention of that when we were in an event together. It absolutely opened my eyes to the way forward with reconciliation. And while some people will make mention of the fact that reconciliation as a word is no longer appropriate, I believe that it's really the way in which we adopt and pursue reconciliation that needs to be reviewed. So, Andrew, I do thank you so much indeed for those insights. And I'm also very impressed, Andrew. You kept to time. I'm very impressed. Thank you so much indeed. I'm now really thrilled to introduce someone I've known for quite a few years. He is it's Rueben Berg. He's a proud Gunjamara man and the co-chair of the First Peoples Assembly Victoria, otherwise known as the Assembly. His fellow co-chair is Wamba Wemba woman Nagara Murray. Rueben sits on the Assembly representing the Eastern Maar Aboriginal Corporation, which is a traditional owner group of southwestern Victoria. As an elected co-chair of the Assembly, he really does play a pivotal role in the direction of the Assembly, communicating and collaborating with the state government and various bodies that work alongside the Assembly, and also along with Nagara, guiding the immense amount of work that has been over the past 4.5 years undertaken by the Assembly. I do challenge everybody to get onto the Assembly's website and start to understand just how broad the work is that has been undertaken by just these 31 people with a very small staff over the past 4 or so years. I will remind you that if you do have questions, please put them in the chat section or the Q&A section, and if we have time, we will throw them to Rueben. So Rueben, respect to you, and thank you so much indeed for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Uncle Charles. It's a pleasure to be here. Nyata, Nyatuk Gunjamara, Nyatuk Kirerarang, Nyatuk Japarong, Nyatuk Wurumai, Nyatuk Parabing, Linya Miring Thanyang Punat, Wanyung Rundri Miring, Todo Rundri Linya, Todo Rundri Cocoon. It's a great pleasure to be here alongside the other speakers as part of the kickoff here for this breakfast. And yeah, I'm just going to go through a bit of an overview of what we've been doing as part of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, where we're heading, and the role of allies in particular in that process. And yeah, really keen to be able to answer people's questions. So as Uncle Charles said, please do throw questions up there in the chat, and happy to try and answer those as we go. But I'm going to give a bit of an overview first of the Assembly itself, and hopefully most people here are reasonably familiar with the Assembly, but for those who might not be, the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria is a democratically elected group of traditional owners. It was established back in 2019 on the back of substantial work that was done by our community across decades to advocate for this sort of body, but in particular, Aunty Jill Gallagher, who was the Treaty Advancement Commissioner, who really spearheaded a lot of this work, and that led to the establishment of the Assembly back in 2019. And it was through a series of elections that we were elected as the representatives on the Assembly, either as representatives for particular regions or as representatives for particular traditional owner groups, as I am for Eastern Maar. So the first set of elections were back in 2019, and we had the second set of elections back in June 2023. And so this is the second term now of the Assembly. And I'm very proud, alongside Nagara Murray, to be one of the co-chairs of the Assembly. And we have 32 members, soon to be 33 members. We have our own process for determining which groups are formally recognised and able to have a seat on the Assembly. And we've recently introduced a new group to be a member of the Assembly, which is a really important enactment of self-determination in our capacity to do that. So the role of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria has evolved over time. In our first term as the Assembly, it was our role to progress the processes for treaty. Because there's never been treaties here in this state or here in this nation before, it was a bit of an unknown about exactly what that should look like. And so we had to set up the infrastructure, the framework for treaty making. And that was through the establishment of the Treaty Authority, through the establishment of the Self-Determination Fund, and the establishment of the Treaty Negotiation Framework. And I'll talk through those things in a bit more detail as we go, but that was our job initially as the Assembly. We've now evolved after this second set of elections to now be responsible for negotiating statewide treaty. So that's a change in what our role is, and we intend to continue to change our roles as we grow and develop and secure more rights from the government. So it's our role to oversee the statewide treaty negotiations, but also here in Victoria, it's really important to recognise that there will be local traditional owner-based treaties. That traditional owner groups are going to be able to come together with support from the Self-Determination Fund to give them resources and expertise to come together and work out who they represent, where their country is, how they relate to their neighbours, and then to be able to sit down and negotiate local traditional owner-based treaties. But the Assembly is responsible for the statewide treaty process. So that's where our focus is as the Assembly. And when we think about a treaty from a statewide basis, we're really thinking about it through the main kind of concepts that First Peoples should be responsible for matters directly related to First Peoples. If there's decisions that are going to be made about First Peoples, they shouldn't be made by the government, they should be made directly by First Peoples. And that's the underlying principle that sets out our work on treaty at a statewide level, but also at a local traditional owner level, with there potentially more of a focus on decision making for traditional owners around land, water, culture, language. They should be seen as the key decision makers in that space. And for the statewide, we're looking at outcomes that affect all First Peoples across the state. So they're the kind of key underlying principles that we think about when we approach these treaty conversations. And we've had lots of conversations with our community across many, many years now, and many different events, many different opportunities for our community to have their say and have discussions about these different matters. And what that's led to is this idea that we want there to be multiple treaties across many years. We've seen and learnt from examples from overseas that what you don't want to do is just have a 30-year process that leads to one final treaty at the end of it. That doesn't seem to be the most effective way to go through things. So what we've set out to be able to do, and is agreed through the rule book that's been established for treaty making, what's known as the Treaty Negotiation Framework, is that we're going to really have a series of agreements. And so we're looking at the moment about this first agreement, this first statewide treaty that we want to make, and what we want to actually have as part of that. And the four kind of key things we've identified based on conversations with our communities that we want to kind of approach for this first statewide treaty outcome is we really want to see a process for the handing over of decision-making powers to First Peoples from the state. And the simplest way I kind of describe that is at the moment we've got a Minister for First Peoples and Treaty, Natalie Hutchins. We essentially want all her powers to come across to the Assembly. There shouldn't be an elected member of Parliament who's making decisions directly about First Peoples. It should be our own democratic institution that's actually making decisions about First Peoples. So that's a key principle, and that we actually want to have realised through this first treaty agreement. As well as having decision-making powers for this expanded version of the Assembly, we also want to make sure we have other roles and responsibilities, including being able to hold government accountable. We know that government has many, many different initiatives, many different programs, policies, strategies about First Peoples. And we also know that very few of those are actually delivered. In fact, I'd say that none of them are delivered in full. And part of the reason for that is that government's not held strongly enough accountable for delivering on those things, not held accountable by an independent mechanism, by a First Peoples-led mechanism, and by a mechanism that's recognised of a similar status to the state. And that's the expanded role we want to see for the Assembly in the future as the representative body, to be able to hold government directly accountable for the delivering on the services and programs and strategies that it's supposed to be delivering on. We also want to make sure that we can give direct advice in a structured way to the Premier, to Cabinet, to secretaries of departments, to have that formal relationship to be able to give advice on key matters at that statewide level. So they're the kind of expanded powers that we're looking at, and roles and responsibilities for the Assembly. So the first two things, as I said, is transfer of decision-making powers. The second is an expansion of the Assembly's role to include accountability mechanisms and advisory powers. The third one is that we want to make sure that through treaty, we can really ensure that we can have First Peoples' cultures and languages recognised and celebrated, and to make sure that there is seen as a broader benefit for all Victorians through this treaty process. And the fourth one is to really be able to draw from the powerful recommendations from Yuruk to actually see those recommendations delivered, to actually agree through treaty the processes for which those recommendations are going to be realised. And the Yuruk process has been a really, really powerful process, and hopefully people were able to see the Premier's evidence last month. That was a really powerful moment in the treaty journey, to have the leader of our state come and present at the York hearings. And I think her speech had some really powerful moments. I encourage people, if you haven't had a chance to look at that, to really take a deep look at that, as well as all the other powerful things that have come out from Yuruk. And actually myself and Nagara will be providing evidence again tomorrow morning for the continuation of Yurok as they move now. They were previously looking at land injustice, and they're moving now to health, housing, education, and economic prosperity. But so those are the 4 things that we're really trying to strive for as part of that first initial statewide treaty: decision-making powers, accountability, celebration of cultures and languages, and implementing Yurok. The way we're going to go about that is through using that treaty negotiation framework and with support from the Treaty Authority. So the Treaty Authority is a really critical part of the landscape of treaty making, and they're 5 First Peoples who have been appointed to oversee the treaty process. We know that when you sit down to have negotiations, there's always going to be some issues that come up. There's going to be disputes. And if you're sitting down to negotiate with the state and you're trying to resolve issues with the state, it's no good having another instrument of the state being the one that tries to resolve those issues. To oversee those is as an unbiased arbitrator. That just doesn't work. So the Treaty Authority has been created as something that's independent from the state, independent from the Assembly, to be able to oversee those negotiations. And that will put us in a really strong position as we progress those negotiations. So that's all set out within this treaty negotiation framework, which is a really critical document, and one that I really recommend people to have a look through. There's a few different versions of it. There's the detailed version of the treaty negotiation framework, and there's also an overview of it, which really gives a high level and with some really powerful diagrams about what that treaty process is going to look like here in Victoria. And it's important to recognise that that treaty negotiation framework is an agreement between the state and the Assembly. It's something the state has signed up to. And there are some really powerful things already actually committed to within that framework. And there's a particular part of the framework that I wanted to highlight here this morning, which is part of the preamble. I encourage everyone to take a look at the entirety of the document, but specifically the preamble has something really powerful that's related to today's conversation. So within the preamble, there's part F, and I'm just going to read this out to you because I think it is so important to have an understanding of. Part F of the preamble says, "The injustice of the past cannot be undone. The state is pursuing treaty making because it is the right thing to do. The state of Victoria needs a treaty or treaties that are reciprocal and that through truth and justice provide far-reaching benefits for First Peoples. For traditional owners, Aboriginal children, elders and stolen people, for a society that all Victorians can be proud of. Treaty making will be for all First Peoples. In the spirit of reconciliation, treaty making will be for all Victorians. A future treaty or treaties should acknowledge truth and healing as guided by the recommendations of the Yurok Justice Commission, enhance the existing laws of this state, bring pride to all Victorians, and have positive impacts for all of Victorian society." And so I think that part of the preamble there is a really critical one that I'd really be advocating for allies to really emphasise and really celebrate that, because I think a lot of the fear mongering that might start as we look, and already has started as we go down this path, can be combated by that sort of statement that has been agreed to by the state and by the Assembly as what this treaty process is about. And I think really critically, when it talks about the idea that treaties will bring pride to all Victorians and have positive impacts for all Victorian society, that's something that I really do encourage and actually challenge allies to think about what that means to you. Because the Assembly, I think we do a really good job of going out there and articulating why treaty will be a positive thing for First Peoples, why it will support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples living here in Victoria. But I think there's a really key role for allies to be able to play in articulating why they think treaty is important to them. What does treaty actually mean to you? And not just through the lens of you would like to see Aboriginal communities thriving, you want to see Aboriginal people being able to be respected in the way they should be and address some of those concerns from the past. That's all really positive things. But I think from a more personal level, I really do encourage and almost, I challenge you to think about, why is treaty personally important to you? What is going to be different for you and your children if we are living in a treaty landscape, a treaty era? And to be able to articulate that to your friends, your colleagues, your family, because I think that's where we'll make the most powerful change, when our allies are not just advocating for treaty because of the benefits they see it will bring to Aboriginal people, but they're advocating it because of the benefits it will also bring to themselves. And that's really, really critical. And in terms of the timelines, I know we often speak about where we're at in this treaty process. We are close. We're on the verge of progressing towards treaties. There is some really powerful work that's already been done, and this is not just jumped up overnight. There's been significant work done across many, many years now, and lots of key milestones have already been met. And so we are continuing to progress despite the outcome of the referendum. We are continuing to progress, and we are hopeful to actually sit down and start the negotiations with the state at the end of this year. Later on this year, we hope to sit down and start negotiations with the idea that we can get some agreements done prior to the end of the next term of the Assembly. So this Assembly, the term ends in June 2026, and we want to make sure we get some powerful outcomes done before then. I just had a few more key things to reiterate in terms of the kind of role that we see for allies in particular. And it is really critical that we do have our allies on board for this process, because we know that we cannot do this on our own. We as First Peoples actually only represent just over 1% of the Victorian community, and so we cannot do this on our own. We do have the good fortune that we're not actually relying on a public vote this time. We're not relying on a referendum to implement treaty, but it is still hugely important to have the support of our allies. One of those reasons is because if the government can see that there is strong support for this, they will be more willing to push the limits of what might be possible. Now, all my conversations with the current government show they are very committed to this, and we've seen powerful statements from the state and from the minister, from the premier, that they are committed to this. But the more they can see the broader support for this, the more confident they will be to continue to push this bold reform. We also need to make sure that there's that ongoing public dialogue to show all parts of the community that there is this support for treaty, to elevate the voices of First Peoples in this space, and to really share the story of what's happening through this treaty, and to make sure that we can actually get some actions out of this, not just performative support, as we've spoken about, but really make sure that we have true action coming from this. And to support that, the Assembly's developed some key elements that we think are going to be really critical for our allies to be able to participate. And there's going to be opportunities for ally organisations to actually participate in a pledge to support treaty. And the key principles that underpin that are these ideas around the actions around collaborate, educate, advocate, and activate. So in terms of collaborate, we want to make sure that our allies are working closely with First Peoples communities and stakeholders. We can't just be going off on our own and doing these things. We need to be making sure that our allies are working alongside First Peoples organisations and communities to build really meaningful relationships and make sure that we're having really positive and ongoing dialogues around the treaty process. And as Uncle Charles said before, really encourage you to follow along what's happening with the Assembly. You can sign up to our newsletters, regardless of whether you're part of the First Peoples communities or not. We need to make sure that everybody out there is informed and understanding what's happening. We need to make sure that our allies are going out there to educate, to raise awareness within your organisations, with your families, with your friends, with your colleagues, about the work that is happening in this space. Make sure they're aware of what is going on, that they're familiar with the treaty negotiation framework. So when we are having these conversations with the broader community, we've got the tools to say this is actually what's happening, to combat some of those myth truths that we know are going to prop up. If we have the right information, we can much better combat some of those things. We want to make sure that our allies can advocate, to actually be talking to key people and saying we support treaty, talking to ministers, talking to key parts of government and saying your support for treaty. That will be really, really powerful to make sure we're having that happening, and that when we see parts of government or parts of the community actually opposing treaty, that we can step up and refute some of those claims, step up and say, well, no, we do support treaty. That's going to be really critical. And to make sure that we can activate and make sure that we can bring along other people as part of this journey. We want to make sure that everybody here who is here today having this conversation goes and has a conversation with 2, 3, 4, 5 other people to spread these messages, to make sure we bring more and more people along with us on this journey. It is a really powerful moment that we are on, and we will continue to progress this. And I have every confidence that we're going to see the first statewide treaty outcomes within the next 2 years. And that will put us on a really solid path to ongoing conversations, ongoing outcomes for treaty, because we are realising the Uluru Statement from the Heart here in Victoria. We have voice. The Assembly is the voice of First Peoples in this process. We have truth-telling through Uruk, and we will have treaties. It is coming, and we need everybody to support this to make sure it can be as strong as possible. I might pause there then, Uncle Charles, and really look forward to having a conversation and answering some questions.
Oh, legendary stuff. And what you've done, Rueben, is you've addressed some of the questions that have come through, and that is that what can people do in the lead up to the treaty? Of course, there's collaborate, educate, advocate. those steps are absolutely critical. I think the sentiment of a lot of the questions that are coming through, though, is what can we learn from the campaigning in leading up to the referendum in October last year that we can take across to our work for supporting treaty going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's lots of different things we can learn. Just a couple I might touch on is that I think when we're having the conversation around the voice, there probably wasn't enough conversation about why we needed it. What is the basis for needing such a voice? And the fact that we actually have now Yuruk having done some really powerful work, that's a really powerful tool for us to be able to articulate why it is that we need treaty. It really helps us identify what are the barriers that government has put in the way of First Peoples that has prevented us from succeeding across generations, and how can treaty be the tool that removes some of those barriers, that actually empowers First Peoples so we can actually see those really powerful outcomes. So I think that was one of the shortcomings, was not articulating enough why we needed this. And we have the good fortune of, as I said, having Yuruk to be that tool to tell that story. I think also one of the challenges was that we didn't quite have that framing right, in that on some hands we were talking to the Aboriginal community and saying, this voice is really going to be important, this is going to be really powerful, it's going to achieve all these different things. But when we went and turned to the broader community, we'd often saying, that's nothing to worry about, it's just an advisory power, it's like all other things, like it's not really that important at all. And so that was a conflict between those two things. So we need to make sure that we're not portraying it that way. We need to say, yes, this is a really important thing. That doesn't mean it's anything to worry about, but it's going to have an impact on the broader community for these positive reasons, and articulate that. And I think that was probably the other thing that was missing, is that the voice was so often spoken about as how it will benefit First Peoples, and not enough about how it would benefit the broader community. And that's something I'm really making sure we have a focus on for this treaty conversation, is allies articulating why treaty is important to them. And I think that will put us in a good space.
So what you're talking about there is looking at things from the positive model perspective rather than the negative model perspective, which, yes, of course, we saw far too much of.
Oh. I'm not sure if that's on my end or yours, Uncle Charles.
Oh, there we go. We had a bit of a technology glitch there. Can you hear me, Rueben?
I can indeed.
Great, thanks so much. You made mention before of one of the goals would be that all the powers vested within the, or vested with Natalie Harchins, or the Minister for Treaty and First Peoples, be transferred over to the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. Is that actually then advocating by default for a reserved seat in state parliament for an Aboriginal representative who would be representing the Assembly?
Not necessarily. It's definitely something that we've seen models of that in other nations around the globe, in terms of some of the treaty outcomes they've been pursuing and actually achieved. But to my mind, it's not so much about having to have a specific seat within the Victorian Parliament. It's about establishing our own institution, which is not another parliament, but a separate entity within the state that's still subject to the parliament, because you can't actually remove the parliament's powers. The parliament still has the power to be the parliament, but a body that can actually be delegated some of those powers of the minister, so that we're actually able to deliver and make those decisions on our own accord. That's what I think is really critical. We don't necessarily want to be one voice among 100. We want to have our own voice, our own capacity to advocate and make decisions on our own right. That's what self-determination is. Self-determination is not being one small part of a broader decision-making power where you don't actually have any influence. Self-determination is actually having the power to make decisions about things that affect you.
A lot of the questions we're getting coming in are all to do with local government. And I know that has been on the rise quite recently. A lot of local governments are getting together. They're getting together a bit of a template on what they believe they should be doing. Mary, Beck, I think Yarra, and quite a few others. What do you think that the members of reconciliation groups and just community members themselves do with regard to lobbying their local governments to pursue treaty or treaty supportive actions?
Yeah, local council is going to be really important, and I think it's going to be particularly important at that local traditional owner level. So when traditional owner groups are coming together to negotiate their treaties, the role of local councils is going to be really critical in that, because we know that local councils often make some key decisions about local areas. And so that's where I think there'll be the greatest intersection. So for allies to be able to talk to your local council and say, what are we doing to get ready for treaty, that, you know, to make sure they're advocating the support of treaty, a really critical thing that local councils are going to need to do is to work out how they're going to collaborate as councils on this process. Because for many traditional owner groups, when they look at the areas that they represent, there are multiple local councils that cross over that area. And what we don't want to be doing is put a burden on traditional owner groups to have to go and negotiate 15 different treaties with 15 different local councils. We want those local councils to start thinking about how they're going to come together to kind of have a unified approach, so that the traditional owner group can negotiate one treaty with a collection of local councils to actually get the best benefits and the best outcomes. So advocating for local councils to start thinking about that, how a local council is going to be working together across and collaborate with other local councils, but also just having a think about what are the particular powers and decision-making roles of local council that we think should be transferred across to traditional owners. Where is it there are decisions being made by local councils that would be much better made in the hands of First Peoples? Having those sorts of conversations about tangible things that we want to see transferred, that's going to be really, really important.
Thanks. Now, I will just remind the audience, if you do have questions, then hit the Q&A button at the top of your screen. And also you will find some information there about the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. Rueben, just to get an idea of the number or the scope of work for a lot of the traditional owner groups, I believe that the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung have around about, or they've got more than 30 local government authorities across their boundaries. When it comes to the Eastern Mara and the Gunditj Mara, how many local government areas have you got across there?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but it's a lot. So Eastern Mara is the eastern part of the Gunditj Mara Nation. So there's Gunditj Miring, who have a whole raft of local councils, and then there's Eastern Mara that have a raft. I think it's at least 7 local council regions that we have across Eastern Mara.
Now, is the Assembly putting together materials to support these actions of the reconciliation groups? Where can they actually go to have, I don't know, some skeleton work to have these kitchen table conversations similar to we had during the referendum?
Yeah, we're just in the process of kind of activating that process. And so people can jump onto the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria website, and there'll be some information there and some more information coming very soon about how we can get our allies to jump on board. And I mentioned before this pledge that we're looking to put together. There's some information on there as well. But if you can't find what you're looking for, just jump on the website and then email the communications team, the engagement team there, and we'll always be happy to reach out and see what we can do to support you.
Now, another question that has come through is that there's obviously a great deal of leadership that's being demonstrated by the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. Following the 2018 Advancing the Treaty Act here in Victoria, we were the first in this state, the first to pursue a treaty with the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, the Yurok Justice Commission, and now, of course, the Treaty Authority. How much pressure is that on the Assembly from the rest of the country? Because obviously people are looking to you, but they're also leaning on you to advance their own causes.
I'll be honest with you, Uncle Charles, I try not to put too much attention on that, because otherwise I'm not sure how I'd get out of bed in the morning. But yes, we are very mindful that there's lots of other stuff happening across the nation, but that we are far and away leading the process. There is some good progress being made, though. Obviously, we had South Australia implement their voice to Parliament and had their elections on that recently, and Queensland are pursuing some truth-telling work there as well. But we do have conversations with other jurisdictions to make sure they can understand how we've gone about things. And the way we've done it isn't necessarily the way that's going to work for other states and territories, but it is important that we share those lessons, and we are aware, despite me trying to avoid that awareness as much as I can, that what we're doing here will set the benchmark. That if we can make this work here in Victoria, that will then enable our brothers and sisters and cousins from across the rest of the nation to get these same outcomes. So yeah, we want to make sure we get this right, and we want to make sure we get it within this term as well to get some outcomes, because if we don't take this opportunity now, we might miss out on those opportunities in the future.
You made mention previously of the importance of providing the community with information about how a treaty can benefit all of Victoria. So where do we find out information about that? Because this is the big thing. Otherwise, it's just going to be perceived as, here are the Aboriginal people trying to grab power for themselves. Where do we find information about how this can benefit Australia or Victoria?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if this is going to be the answer that you want, Uncle Charles, but I don't want to give people that answer. I want people to think about themselves. I think it's not going to be meaningful for me to sit here and tell people why treaty is going to benefit them from the broader community. I need the broader community to start thinking about, understand what this process is, understand what we're trying to achieve, and then think about why that will be beneficial to them. Because I think that's how it's going to be the most genuine answer, and the most genuine way for our allies to support this is to really take a deep think about what will this mean when First Peoples are in a better place within our society. And that's what I think is critical in this process. That it's going to take some work from people to actually sit down and do this. And I don't think it is something that needs to be kind of spoon-fed and told, this is what we want you to say. I genuinely want people to think about what this is going to mean for them and articulate that. And I think that's going to be really critical to the success of this process.
I will, in that case, take I'll take advantage of the opportunity to say, well, if you'd like to hear Rueben talking about some of these things, then get onto the Vic Aboriginal News website. We did an interview with Rueben a couple of months ago where we did touch on a few of those things. But absolutely, it is important that people are not spoon-fed this. The base information is really right across Europe and across the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria website. Rueben, last question before we let you go is, how much have you drawn on the international experiences with treaty? Because I know that when Aunty Jill was with the Victorian Treaty Advancement Commission, she went over to Canada and other countries where treaties were held. With that work, how much of that is influencing what you and your fellow Assembly members are actually achieving now?
Yeah, it has been really, really important across the years to make sure we are looking and learning and understanding what's been happening across the globe with other First Peoples. And we've had some significant conversations with people from Aotearoa from over in New Zealand. And we had Justice Joe Williams come across and speak at our statewide gathering recently, and his speech was really powerful. And you can actually find that online still on the Assembly website. We've had conversations with members of the First Peoples community from British Columbia, from the Sami people. We had a delegation of First Peoples from Taiwan come and speak to us the other day. So we are really making sure we're connecting to that global First Peoples community and seeing what it is that we can learn. Now, the challenge is that the way we're going about approaching treaty is different from all those other places. All those other places have either been doing things at an entire nationwide level, or they've been doing it very much on a focused clan-based, traditional owner-based community level. And we're doing this at a state-based level and with both statewide and local traditional owner level. So there's only so many parallels that we can draw. What I will say is that in the conversations with the overseas communities, the biggest thing that has stuck to me from those conversations, and especially from those groups who were negotiating treaties that took many, many years until they finally got an outcome, and in some circumstances, groups spent many, many years negotiating and then didn't get an outcome. The biggest lesson I heard from all of that is that the process itself of negotiating treaty has to build capacity and strength within communities. It's not just the final outcome, it's the journey is just as important. And so it's not about just hiring the best lawyers and getting them into a room to go off and negotiate with the state's lawyers. It's about bringing the community along, building capacity of community through this process so that regardless of the outcome, you've improved as a community, you've got strengths as a community, even if you don't get a treaty outcome. Hopefully everyone does get a treaty outcome, but it actually, the process itself needs to build skills and capacity and strength through that itself.
Rueben, thanks so much indeed. We've come to the end of our questions, the end of our time. I want to, on behalf of everybody here, congratulate you, Nagara, and everyone else on the Assembly and those who were in Assembly 1.0 from 2019 forward for the amazing work you're doing. And we do know that we're going to end up with a better Victoria. The challenge is up to everybody to determine how it will be better and to start sharing that message. And I'm sure from everybody at the Assembly, we do encourage all our allies to support the work in which we're doing. You don't have to agree with every single thing that the Assembly is doing, but it's all about the concept. We can fine-tune things as we go forward. Rueben, respect to you, my brother, and thank you so much indeed.
Thank you. The one thing I was going to say at the end is a really simple thing that we can get our allies to do is when you're giving your acknowledgements and hopefully they're heartfelt acknowledgements as always, at the end of that, you can simply add, and I support Treaty for Victoria. And that will have a profound difference to do that.
Thanks so much indeed. Challenge accepted, and I'm sure taken up by everybody. Rueben, once again, thanks so much indeed.
Thank you.
All right. Well, now I believe we're going to be bringing our CEO to, there we go. There's Nicole. Well, I just want to, first of all, Nicole, before we pass over to you, I just want to extend on behalf of everybody, and I know you'll do the same thing, but to our speakers who got up this morning. I know Andrew's up there freezing his bottom off in Hall's Gap. We're all around Victoria or even further afield doing some amazing stuff. And of course, to Aunty Vicki Clark, love listening to Aunty Vicki, just that beautiful passion she brings every time. Nick?
Absolutely. Thank you, Uncle Charles, and so do you, and so does Rueben. And thank you very much. I'm meeting with you on the land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, and I support treaty. I'm going to say that right up front. It's without a shadow of a doubt. That's our first and foremost, and truth telling. Absolutely, they are. Truth telling is our critical pathway to treaties and part of reconciliation. It is the critical part, and we are just so pleased today to have Rueben. You shared, the wealth of knowledge, and I must just say we had a bit of a shaky start this morning with a couple of our tech issues. So those who joined us nice and early, you might have seen our clip from the Returning Our Ancestors film, which we'll be screening this week. And Uncle Jim Berg spoke in there, and respectfully, Uncle Jim Berg has been a senior elder of the First Peoples Cultural Council for Reconciliation Victoria, and of course is Ruben's father. And it was remiss of me not to mention Uncle Jim speaking early up and doing a reading, and we're going to play that clip again for you a bit later before we finish up today. But I did also respectfully want to acknowledge Aunty Vicki Clark, who streamed in with us from Naya, and such a great champion, long-standing champion of reconciliation, and also to Andrew Gunstone, who's our co-chair for Reconciliation Victoria. But Uncle Charles, we have such a big week ahead, and to see that apology by the Victorian Police Commissioner, Shane Patton, on Friday, I think many of us have been waiting for that moment for so long, and to see that great work of the Europe Commission bringing that acknowledgement and that apology in at the Aboriginal Advancement League on Friday. It was so powerful. And then we went to the long walk on Saturday, Uncle Charles, and we saw Eva Jo Edwards walking around at the long walk. And honestly, we know how long people have been waiting for this, and it is now more than ever. But the path that has been forged by elders and ancestors for so long to get us to where we are today. We know reconciliation has been inflamed here in Victoria from the referendum. We know that we now have the second largest amount of reconciliation action plan organisations in any state around the country. We know that we've grown local reconciliation groups from 23 groups up to, I think we're somewhere in the vicinity of 29, 30 groups. And that means we're inspired. The spirit of reconciliation has not been dampened in this state. And that is what's so exciting. This beautiful blue sky we're getting is because we are in the most hopeful state at the moment. But so that's where we're at, Uncle. Where are you at this morning?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm down in my local gathering place, and I'm sure, like everybody, we've got a full week planned out ahead. I've got to duck up to Banyul in a very short while for a flag raising, and then we have another local gathering with the Somali community in our community area here. And this is just it. I think reconciliation is wherever you want to take it. I don't know about you, Nicole, but I get a bit frustrated when I hear people say, well, reconciliation as a concept is dead. We need to find another word. I mean, can we not focus on a word? Can we just look at this, what needs to be done? And as Andrew made mention before, and I'm a huge fan of this, we need to look at what can be done substantively to further reconciliation, or whatever the word is, but the actions must never, ever ease up. So that's my call out to everybody here, that we continue with the actions and don't worry about all this kerfuffle going on about what we're going to call reconciliation. It's all about acting, going forward. And as Rueben said, at the end of every acknowledgement of country, I support treaty.
Absolutely. And Uncle, this is a shameless plug, but this book that Andrew Gunstone has put out, there is a beautiful foreword at the beginning from Dr. Jackie Huggins, who is another great leader of the reconciliation space. And she writes in her foreword, and I'd love to read this if I could. It says, although the referendum was a heavy defeat for most of us, the reconciliation journey is neither lost nor dead. Some looked for scapegoats to blame, and reconciliation was the first. However, reconciliation means different things to people. My definition is it means recognition, justice, and healing. If we pursue these ideals, it is far from over. And I just love the fact that she wrote that, because that makes my heart sing. It truly does. It tells us that we are on the right pathway here, and Rueben leading in Nagara in those, their ancestors and their uncles and aunties. For many of us who've worked in the reconciliation space for 20, 30 years, we're newcomers to this space, really. But to know their great, fathers, mothers have, fought this hard journey, for grandmothers have fought this hard journey for a long time, and reconciliation has been here since day dot. There were the fighters, there were the Anne Bonds, there were the strong people that were with the Wurundjeri and the Narangita early on in our settlement, that were trying to fight for truth and justice and survival together. And they knew right from the get-go, some of the settlers knew that what was being done was wrong, and they were fighting to change that. And we are still now, all the way down here in 2024, still fighting for this. It is the right thing, and we know those who went, those 6.2 million who voted yes, were not on the wrong pathway. They were on the right pathway, and they knew that. And the 6.2 million aren't going to unlearn what we know, which is the truth. And so we are inspired. We know that there was also referendum regret. A lot of people learnt some things that they hadn't learnt as part of the referendum. And I think many regretted that they didn't vote yes. And they're the people we need to bring along with us right now. So
yeah, look, no doubt about it. And I will just make a personal comment, and that is something that I've said many, many times before, that if you thought that the lies and the disparaging comments from the Conservative side or the naysayers for the referendum were a once in a lifetime, then really you haven't seen anything yet. Because once these sentiments and these expressions of hope that the Assembly is coming forward with, for example, assuming the responsibilities and the powers of the Minister for First Peoples and Treaty be given to the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, which is where they belong, then you can be rest assured that those who were vocal naysayers during the referendum, they will be there again. And we need to learn from where we made mistakes in the referendum. And we need to accept the fact that we did make mistakes. We didn't run a campaign that really could have been more effective. And we need to learn from that and carry forward, because we need to support treaty. That's a critical thing.
Absolutely.
Now, Nicole, I'm going to leave it to you, because we're going to have the Returning Our Ancestors video. Is that correct? We are going to have that now?
We are. And I wonder if, I'm not sure if the team have the video for us to play again just shortly. But I think Uncle, if we could just, sort of draw a line back to what Rueben just, that call to action about collaborate, educate and activate, that is so critical. And I think where we have our very clear call to action there, the collaboration is the strength in numbers. That call to all the local councils to, come together. The greatest lesson community has ever taught reconciliation supporters is to work together, to not work in silos, and to change the culture of our organisations to collectively come together and collaborate. And that is so powerful. Thank you, Rueben, for reminding us of the importance of that and educating. The one thing is that the other critical gap we saw out of the referendum, Uncle, was that very stark divide in knowledge gap. We have a knowledge gap in this country. It is our greatest divide, and it is the gap that we need to. And Reconciliation Victoria does, with the authorities of URIC and the Assembly guiding us, we do that public education piece, but we need the public support right now. We need corporate Australia also to get behind us. If we've seen all those 600 odd and more RAP organisations across the state, please fund us. We are independently funded. We are not funded by Rec Australia. We need corporate Australia's support. And they did come around, they did, and they always have supported. They showed us that in the referendum. So we need to do that public education piece. And the activate piece is clear. It makes it so much easier when we're collaborating and educating to get out there and be active. So, but Uncle, we are about to play the video very shortly. We also did want to mention, because I'm conscious that everyone's been having their brekkie with us today, and we wanted to mention that for two lucky people who are joining us today, we will be just sort of drawing your name out of the hat, and we've got some a breakfast, a real breakfast for Mabu, or a dinner, lunch, whichever meal you like to have. But we'll be giving that to attendees today. And all we're asking, if you could provide us with some feedback, and when we send the feedback survey to you, just what you're going to take away and do this week and beyond this week in terms of how you're going to activate yourselves and your community around you and do that education piece and collaborate. But before we go, I know we've got about 10 minutes, Uncle, so I'll just call on the team to see if we've got that video piece ready. If it pops up, we know it's ready.
Spirits of the land. Sunbeams are filtered through the raindrops as they fall into the forest and onto the land. The rain brings forth new life and refreshes the old. Breathe clean, fresh air and smell the scents and the aroma of forest gum trees, ferns, grasses, animals, wildflowers, the land. Birds singing fills the air, leeches underfoot, as we walk hand in hand through this rain-drenched forest and land. My soulmate and me are received, welcomed, and we are embraced by the spirits of the land.
Coming back in.
Yeah, Uncle Jim Berg,
Yes.
who's absolutely a champion in the excuse me, in the community, and Uncle Jim Berg, of course, instrumental in the formation of the Koori Heritage Trust and so much more. And look, I think that's really appropriate that we do encourage people to get involved in activities. I want to echo very much what Nicole made mention of, supporting Reconciliation Victoria. The amount of funding that they receive from the state government is criminally minimal, quite frankly. And look, if anybody here is from the state government, then if we can do anything to ensure the state government does find discretionary funding, because Reconciliation Victoria and the 29 groups now, you were saying, Nicole, is that right?
Yeah, and I think there's probably more, because we've got groups like Mums for Reconciliation, Justice for Maribyrnong, all these groups that are popping up now with new names, which is great.
and of course all those groups that stayed together, that worked for the referendum and are still happening right now. And I've been privileged to meet up with quite a few of them and see the amazing work they are still doing. Then we do need to start applying pressure to local government, to corporates, to state government, to start funding this important work, because when you think about it, the state government is investing significantly in this initiative for treaty and not really investing in those people on the ground, such as everyone watching here, the reconciliation groups that are being charged with the responsibility of going out there and collaborating, advocating and educating. And that's up to all of us. Nick, I'll leave that to you now.
And that's right. I mean, in terms of those local rec groups, local reconciliation groups, they're in metro and regional areas of Victoria. They are independently, they don't actually, they're volunteer run. They are not supported by the state. And when they do start up their groups, they have 40, 50 members plus. And the demographic is non-Indigenous elders who want to see this change before they go. And truly, most of them have remarkable stories as well. And what I think I'd just like the audience to invite them to understand that as a team of 5 staff at Reconciliation Victoria, carrying the second largest amount of RAPs in the country, as well as working with schools and all those 79 local councils, as well as supporting the local reconciliation groups, it's a mammoth task for us. And we are inviting more philanthropic groups and groups to see that we need your help right now. We can't do it with this minimal staff. And as we were just sharing before with Uncle Jim's reading, Uncle Charles, we've got a very special screening of Returning Our Ancestors, which will be held this Wednesday. And I do want to mention that it is in partnership with Moonee Valley City Council. If they're joined with us today, I just want to send a special thank you. And I have done a shameless plug on one book already, but this is another book, which is The Power and the Passion, which is Uncle Jim's book with Shannon Forkhead, and there will be copies of the book available at the film screening. But such a powerful book by Uncle Jim, and we're hoping that Uncle Jim will also be joining us for that screening. So it's at the Clock Tower building in Moonee Valley. We'd love people to come along for that on Wednesday. And also on Thursday, we'll be hosting the Magalee Awards. The Magalee Awards celebrate local councils across the state who are working in strong partnership with First Peoples and traditional owners and we'll be distributing or presenting 10 awards this year, Uncle. And honestly, the stories that have come through about the work that councils are doing with traditional owners and all First Peoples, really we are seeing some remarkable progress in that joint and shared decision making that's going on in local councils, and we're really excited to be presenting those at the Jeering Community Hub in Footscray. If we've got people joining us today who would like to be part of that ceremony on Thursday morning in Flemington, it is in Jeering, we would really love to have you join us for that. And also, Uncle, on Friday, you're attending the Aboriginal Remembrance Service at the Shrine, which will be joining you to lay a wreath there. Could you talk about this event, because you're the master of ceremony for that event as well? We know you're all over the state, but this is something particularly dear to your heart and quite personal.
Yeah, it is. Thanks so much indeed, Nicole. The Victorian Aboriginal Remembrance Committee, which started up around about 20 years ago with Aunty Doc Peters, and ironically enough, an expatriate Egyptian flight sergeant from the Royal Australian Air Force, Sam Hallam, who's become a great friend of mine. They have been for 20 years running this ceremony, and it's all to acknowledge the service and sacrifice of Aboriginal servicemen and servicewomen that have for so long been unrecognised. Now, it's happening at the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne at 11 o'clock. It is open to the public. I believe that more information can be found on the Shrine's website at shrine.org.au. It is, as you mentioned, I will be emceeing this, and it's been my honour to be able to volunteer to MC this event for the past, I think 3 or 4 years. I can't remember. I know the first year that we did it, it was all online because we were still in lockdown. But it's a very emotional experience. And for me, my father was an Aboriginal infantryman during World War II and died as a result of his service in 1975. I myself spent 9 years as an infantry soldier in the Australian Army. So it's very, very close to my heart. And of course, I served with a lot of Aboriginal servicemen in my time and heard many, many stories. So it's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. The Department of Premier and Cabinet is involved in it as well. They're supporting it. But if you do get there, then do make the time to go and shake the hands of this amazing man, Flight Sergeant Sam Hallam, retired, who's just been a legend and who will quite often ring me up and bitch and moan about the fact that this just has not gone far enough. And I quite agree with him. But yeah, 11 o'clock on Friday at the Shrine of Remembrance. It's going to be a huge event, really big this year.
Oh, well, thank you, Uncle, for all you do. And you know, many people will see you out and about during, you know, this week and throughout the year. And we really applaud you because you are a great reconciliation champion, as well as, you know, many other hats that you wear, especially with 3K&D, and you've got your show back there, but and also with the Victorian Aboriginal News, really paving the way for voice, for community, and really powerful leaders who are part of, you know, who you're capturing those stories and sharing them. So we applaud you and we thank you so much for being our MC today. I'm looking at that beautiful artwork behind you, and you're sitting in at Barban and Beak Aboriginal Gathering Place this morning, and that artwork always reminds me where exactly where you are. And you know, we work with, there's 17, 18 Aboriginal gathering places now, which are growing across the state as well, and all, you know, really strong community groups all coming together, you know, about that supporting self-determination and service, critical service deliveries in there for community. So we thank you for being up nice and early with us today, Uncle. And to Aunty Vicki, thank you. I can see you in the see you also still with us. Thank you, Aunty Vicki. I hope you get better. I know that you've had some nice soup on the boil and you've been cooking soup, but you'll have to make some make some more. And also to Rueben, thank you so much for joining us, Rueben. We've just heard so much good news, and we are right behind you. We support treaty, and I know that Professor Andrew Gunstone, who's with us as well, he's wearing his treaty t-shirt this morning. We will be out and about wearing our t-shirts, and you know, until we get this business done. So thank you everybody for your time today. For everybody that has streamed in with us, we have about 3 minutes left. So Uncle, aunties, Rueben, any last reflections?
I've got one thing, and that is, if you really want to demonstrate you're an ally to treaty, get onto firstpeoplesvic.org, and there is an Allies merch pack that you can pick up. You get key rings, you can get your t-shirt. I think it's a tote bag too, a whole lot of swag. And that's a really strong way of just sharing the news and spreading your support for treaty, because as I mentioned before, you may not agree with every single little thing, but no one ever does. But the fact is that this is an amazing initiative being undertaken by such a few number of people. And regardless if it's treaty or reconciliation, what always impresses me is it's that small number of dedicated people that march forward and change the whole fabric of our society. So respect to you, Nicole, for the reconciliation work that you and your team are doing. And of course, to my brother Rueben, we have many great conversations, but the work is just phenomenal. Of course, to Aunty Vicki, love hearing you talk, Aunt, and we are going to get up there. We are going to do an interview with you pretty darn soon, let me assure you of that. And Andrew, always a great learning experience. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Uncle. Okay. And we have a special stick here. And this special stick has been gifted to me by Graham Gilbert. And I'm going to just finish by saying we support treaty. We hope you'll stick around with us for Rec Week and make reconciliation your business all year round. Thank you. Have a great week. Thank you, everyone.